The sun rises, but its light feels hollow as Kael stands atop the crumbling Watchtower, the Dawnstone clutched in his trembling hands. Once, it pulsed with the power to shield his people, the Dawnfire Clan, from the darkness. Now it is cold and shattered, a lifeless relic of a fading hope. Below, the Shadowspawn Horde gathers, their whispers of destruction carried on the wind. Kael knows the truth. His home is on the brink of annihilation. But in this moment of despair, a spark ignites within him, a reckless, desperate resolve. He will leave everything behind, step beyond the borders of the only world he's ever known, and seek the Oracle of Lumina, a figure of legend who may hold the key to restoring the Dawnstone. Elder Thaler, his mentor and the closest thing he has to a father, warns him of the perils that lie ahead. Yet Kael's decision is made. With the weight of his people's survival on his shoulders, he takes his first step into the unknown, setting in motion a journey that will challenge every fiber of his being and alter the course of his destiny forever. This is the tale of Kael, a warrior who dared to defy the darkness, and the world that will rise or fall with his choices. The air in the whispering woods was thick with mist, clinging to Kael's skin like a cold, damp shroud. Every step he took seemed to sink into the soft earth, the forest floor alive with the rustle of unseen creatures. The trees loomed tall and ancient, their gnarled branches twisting overhead like skeletal fingers. It was a place where light struggled to penetrate, and shadows seemed to move on their own. Kael tightened his grip on his blade, his senses on high alert. He knew the stories. This was no ordinary forest. The whispering woods had a way of playing tricks on the mind, and danger could strike at any moment. It didn't take long for the first sign of trouble to appear. A low growl echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of snapping twigs. Kael spun around just in time to see a pack of Shadowspawn scouts emerging from the underbrush. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, and their movements were unnervingly precise. These were no ordinary beasts. They were hunters, trained to track and kill. Kael didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air with practiced precision. The fight was fierce and chaotic, each moment a test of his skill and resolve. Just as he thought he'd gained the upper hand, a cry for help pierced the air. Drawn by the sound, Kael turned to see a figure struggling against one of the Shadowspawn. Without thinking, he charged, driving his blade into the creature's side. The figure stumbled back, revealing herself to be a young woman with piercing green eyes and a tattered cloak. She introduced herself as Lyra, a scholar of the ancient world, though her disheveled appearance suggested she'd been on the run for some time. Grateful for his help, she offered to guide Kael to the Oracle, a legendary being said to hold the answers he sought. But there was something in her voice, a hesitation that made him wary. What was she hiding? As the two pressed deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew heavier, the whispers more insistent. It was as if the forest itself was alive, its voice a low, murmuring hum that seemed to come from all directions. Kael couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and twist, and the air grew colder with each passing step. Lyra remained silent, her gaze darting nervously to the trees. Kael couldn't tell if she was afraid of what lay ahead or what she might be hiding. One thing was certain: the Whispering Woods held more than just secrets. Something far more dangerous was waiting in the darkness, and it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself. The air grew heavy as Kael and Lyra approached the edge of the chasm, the ground beneath their feet crumbling with every step. Before them stretched a bridge, its stones weathered by time and neglect, barely holding together. This was the only way forward, and though the sight of it filled them with unease, they had no choice but to cross. Lyra hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the depths below, but Kael motioned for her to follow. Together, they began their cautious journey across the fragile structure. Halfway across, the bridge groaned under their weight, and a deafening crack echoed through the chasm. Stones began to tumble into the void, and the ground beneath them shifted violently. Kael's hand shot out to steady Lyra, but as he did, the Dawnstone slipped from his grasp, falling toward the abyss. In that split second, he faced an impossible choice: reach for the stone or save Lyra. Without hesitation, he lunged for her, pulling her to safety as the bridge gave way. The Dawnstone, however, disappeared into the darkness below, its light swallowed by the void. Lyra, shaken but unharmed, turned to Kael with a determined glint in her eyes. "There's a way to get it back," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. The Forgotten City lies beneath these ruins. Its underground pathways lead to the bottom of the chasm, but it's not a place anyone enters willingly. The city is cursed, its halls filled with ancient magic that twists the mind and tests the soul. Kael's jaw tightened. The thought of venturing into such a place sent a chill through him, but the Dawnstone was too important to abandon. He glanced at Lyra, searching her face for reassurance, but found only resolve. His trust in her wavered. How did she know so much about this cursed place? Yet, with no other options, he nodded reluctantly. Together, they began their descent into the darkness, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily on Kael's shoulders as the Forgotten City loomed ahead, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. The air grew heavy as Kael and Lyra ventured deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels of the Forgotten City. The walls seemed to close in around them, their surfaces etched with ancient runes that pulsed faintly with a malevolent light. Every step forward was a gamble, with hidden traps and spectral guardians lurking in the shadows, ready to strike. Kael's had never left the hilt of his sword, his senses sharpened by years of combat. But even he couldn't anticipate the chilling presence that awaited them. From the darkness emerged a wraith, its form shifting and ethereal, bound to the ruins by some long-forgotten curse. Its hollow eyes locked onto them, and the battle began. Kael's blade cut through the air with precision, each strike a testament to his skill, but the wraith's spectral nature made it a formidable foe. Just as the tide seemed to turn against them, Lyra stepped forward, her voice low and steady as she began to chant. The words she spoke were unfamiliar to Kael, carrying a weight and power that sent shivers down his spine. With a final incantation, Lyra unleashed a forbidden spell. The air crackled with energy, and the wraith let out a piercing scream as it was consumed by a swirling vortex of shadow. Silence fell over the ruins, but the victory was short-lived. Kael turned to Lyra, his expression a mix of awe and suspicion. The spell she had used was no ordinary magic. It bore the unmistakable mark of the Shadowspawn, the very force they were fighting against. Lyra met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. She revealed the truth. Once, long ago, she had served the Shadowspawn. It was a chapter of her life she had tried to bury, but the power she had wielded against the Wraith was a stark reminder of her past. Kael's mind raced. Could he trust someone who had been an enemy? The weight of his decision pressed down on him as he weighed the risks of continuing their journey together. After a tense silence, Kael made his choice. He would give her a chance, not because he fully trusted her, but because he sensed the sincerity in her desire for redemption. Still, the air between them grew colder, the unspoken tension thickening with every step they took. Together, they retrieved the Dawnstone, its radiant light a stark contrast to the shadows that clung to their partnership. As they prepared to leave the ruins, the question lingered. Could they truly overcome their differences, or would the shadows of their pasts tear them apart? The air was thick with tension as Kael and Lyra emerged from the crumbling ruins, their breaths still ragged from the fight. But before they could catch their bearings, the shadows around them shifted, alive and menacing. From the darkness, a war party of Shadowspawn materialized, their twisted forms silhouetted against the dim light. At their helm stood Malachar, a towering figure clad in jagged armor, his voice dripping with malice as he stepped forward. "So, the prodigal son returns," he sneered, his gaze locked on Kael. "Your clan burns, and yet here you are, chasing shadows instead of defending your own." Kael's heart sank at the words. The Dawnfire Clan, his people were under attack. His fists clenched, torn between the instinct to race back and the weight of the quest he carried. Malachar's laughter echoed as he continued, taunting him. "What will it be, Kael? Will you abandon your duty for a fool's errand? Or will you watch as we crush everything you hold dear?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady but urgent. "Kael, listen to me. If we turn back now, we lose everything. The Dawnstone is our only chance to stop them, not just for your clan, but for all of us." Her words cut through the chaos, grounding him. She was right. The Dawnstone held the power to turn the tide, to end the Shadowspawn's onslaught once and for all. But the thought of leaving his people to face Malachar's forces alone felt like a betrayal. Reluctantly, Kael nodded, his jaw tight with resolve. "We stay the course," he said, though the words tasted bitter on his tongue. As they pressed onward, the guilt gnawed at him, a relentless weight that seemed to grow heavier with every step. The image of his clan, their homes, their faces flashed in his mind, a constant reminder of what he had left behind. But Lyra's presence beside him was a quiet anchor, her determination a mirror to his own. Together they moved forward, not out of recklessness, but out of necessity. The fate of the Dawnfire Clan, and perhaps the world itself, depended on what lay ahead. As Kael and Lyra approached the base of the Sunspire Mountains, the air grew thin and cold, biting at their lungs with every breath. The towering peaks loomed above them, their jagged edges cutting into the sky like the teeth of some ancient beast. This was no ordinary journey. Every step forward was a test of will, a battle against nature itself. Avalanches thundered in the distance, sending plumes of snow cascading down the slopes, while the cries of unseen predators echoed through the icy passes. It was clear The path to the Oracle of Lumina was not meant for the faint of heart. Kael's muscles burned with every stride, his body pushed to its absolute limit. The relentless climb left him gasping, his breath visible in the frosty air. Yet, despite the exhaustion, he pressed on, driven by the weight of his quest. Beside him, Lyra moved with a quiet determination, her eyes scanning their surroundings with a sharp focus. Where Kael relied on sheer physical strength, Lyra's knowledge of ancient runes became their lifeline. She deciphered symbols carved into the stone, revealing hidden paths and warning them of traps laid by the mountain itself. Her expertise turned what could have been certain death into a navigable route, and Kael couldn't help but feel a growing respect for her. As they ascended, Kael began to notice something he hadn't before. Lyra wasn't just a guide or a scholar. She was a fighter, her resolve unshaken by the dangers around them. When a pack of snow wolves emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with hunger, Lyra stood her ground, chanting an incantation that sent the beasts retreating into the white void. In that moment, Kael saw her not just as a companion, but as a true equal. Her bravery was undeniable, her spirit unyielding, and it sparked a newfound admiration in him. But their journey was far from over. Just as they thought they were closing in on the Oracle's sanctuary, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A massive stone guardian emerged from the snow, its body carved with glowing runes, and its eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. It spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the mountain itself, demanding a sacrifice in exchange for passage. Kael's heart sank. He had faced countless trials, but this was different. The Guardian's words hung heavy in the air, forcing him to confront a question he had avoided. What was he willing to give up to achieve his destiny? The weight of the decision pressed down on him, colder than the mountain winds. Every choice he had made up to this point had been for the greater good, but this felt personal. What could he sacrifice that wouldn't break him? Lyra stood silently beside him, her expression unreadable, offering no easy answers. The moment stretched, the silence broken only by the howl of the wind, as Kael grappled with the cost of his quest. The mountain had stripped him of his strength, his pride, and now it demanded something more. And as he stood there, frozen in thought, the fate of their journey, and perhaps the world, rested on his next decision. As Kael stood before the Guardian, the weight of his sword in his hand felt heavier than ever. This blade had been more than a weapon. It was a part of him, a symbol of his identity as a warrior, forged in the fire of his clan's traditions. But now, in this moment, he knew what he had to do. With a steady breath, he extended the sword to the Guardian, offering it as a token of his sincerity. The Guardian, silent and imposing, accepted the blade with a nod, stepping aside to let them pass. Kael felt a pang of vulnerability as his hand now lay empty, but it was a vulnerability that carried a strange sense of freedom. Lyra, ever observant, noticed the shift in him. Without hesitation, she reached into her satchel and drew out a dagger, small yet finely crafted. The blade bore intricate engravings, a relic from a life she rarely spoke of. She handed it to Kael, her eyes meeting his in a moment of unspoken understanding. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a gesture of trust, a reminder that they were in this together. Kael accepted the dagger, its weight unfamiliar but comforting, a symbol of the bond they were building. As they moved closer to the Oracle's sanctuary, the path ahead seemed to narrow, the air growing heavier with anticipation. Kael's thoughts turned inward. He couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come since leaving his clan. The man who had once defined himself solely by his strength and skill in battle was now grappling with questions he had never allowed himself to ask. What did it mean to be a warrior without his sword? What did it mean to lead when the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty? The sanctuary loomed in the distance, its ancient stones glinting faintly in the fading light. But as they approached, a sudden shift in the wind caught their attention. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, rolling in with an ominous speed. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and sharp against their skin. It wasn't just a storm brewing, it was a warning, a sign that the trials they had faced so far were merely a prelude to something far greater. Kael tightened his grip on the dagger, his resolve hardening. This journey was no longer just about saving his people. It was about discovering who he truly was beneath the armor, beneath the titles, beneath the expectations. The storm ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine, but he was ready to face it not just as a warrior, but as a man willing to confront the unknown within himself. As Kael and Lyra stepped deeper into the sanctuary, the air around them seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy. The walls, carved with ancient symbols, pulsed faintly, as though alive. At the heart of the chamber stood the Oracle, a being not of flesh but of radiant light, its form shifting and flowing like a living flame. Its voice echoed, not in words but in thoughts that resonated within their minds, cryptic and layered with meaning. The Oracle spoke of the Dawnstone, the artifact that could restore light to their world, but its revelation came with a heavy price. To awaken the stone's power, a piece of Kael's soul would be required, a sacrifice that could leave him broken, or worse, lifeless. The weight of the Oracle's words hung in the air, and Kael felt the gravity of the choice before him. His hesitation was palpable, his hands trembling as he weighed the cost of his own survival against the fate of their world. But before he could speak, Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady and resolute. "Take mine instead," she said, her eyes locked on the Oracle. "If a soul is needed, let it be mine." Her offer hung in the silence, a testament to her courage and selflessness. Kael turned to her, his heart torn between gratitude and fear, but the Oracle's light shifted, accepting her sacrifice without hesitation. As Lyra's essence flowed into the Dawnstone, the artifact began to glow, its light growing brighter and warmer, filling the chamber with a brilliance that felt like hope itself. Kael could only watch, overwhelmed by Lyra's act of bravery. He reached for her, but before he could speak, the sanctuary's tranquility shattered. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the chamber, and the air grew cold. Malachar and his forces had found them, their dark presence casting a shadow over the renewed light of the Dawnstone. The sanctuary, once a place of refuge, now felt like a trap. Kael's heart raced as he realized the battle they had hoped to avoid was now unavoidable. The cost of their quest had just grown steeper, and the stakes had never been higher. The air inside the sanctuary crackled with tension as Kael and Lyra stood back to back, surrounded by the relentless Shadowspawn. The Dawnstone, now glowing fiercely in Kael's hand, pulsed with a light that seemed to echo his heartbeat. With every strike of his blade, the stone amplified his strength, his movements faster and sharper than ever before. But there was a cost. Each burst of power drained him, leaving him gasping for breath, his limbs growing heavier with every passing moment. Lyra, her hands glowing with the forbidden magic she had sworn never to use, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Her spells tore through the Shadowspawn, their dark forms disintegrating into ash. Yet, even as she unleashed her power, she could feel the strain. The magic she wielded was not meant for mortal hands, and it burned through her like fire. Together, they carved a path through their enemies, but the tide of battle was relentless. Just as it seemed they might gain the upper hand, Malachar emerged from the shadows, his presence suffocating. With a cruel smile, he lunged for Kael, his clawed hand closing around the Dawnstone. "You thought you could wield this power," Malachar sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You are nothing but a boy playing at heroism." The Dawnstone was torn from Kael's grasp, and for a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. But then, something inside Kael snapped. The thought of losing everything, the sanctuary, the Dawnstone, Lyra ignited a fire within him. With a roar, he channeled every ounce of his will into the Dawnstone, forcing it to respond. A blinding surge of energy erupted from the stone, slamming into Malachar and sending him staggering back. The force was overwhelming, but so was the toll it took on Kael. His vision blurred, his legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground, the world around him fading into darkness. Lyra was at his side in an instant, her hands trembling as she pulled him to safety. The sanctuary, already weakened by the battle, began to crumble around them. Stones fell from the ceiling, dust filled the air, and the once sacred halls echoed with the sound of destruction. Lyra's heart pounded as she dragged Kael toward the exit, her mind racing. They had survived, but at what cost? The Dawnstone was gone, and with it, their last hope. As the sanctuary collapsed behind them, Lyra couldn't shake the image of Kael's reckless use of the Dawnstone's power. It had saved them, but it had also nearly destroyed him. What would happen if he tried to wield it again? And more importantly, how could they face Malachar without it? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered and unsettling. For now, all that mattered was getting Kael to safety and finding a way to keep fighting. Kael stirred, his body aching as his senses slowly returned. The air was cool and damp, and the faint flicker of torchlight danced on the rough stone walls around him. He was in a hidden cave, far from the chaos of the battlefield. Beside him, Lyra knelt, her hands steady as she finished bandaging his wounds. Her expression was grave, but her presence brought a small measure of comfort. "You've been out for hours," she said softly, her voice echoing in the cavern. "The fight took more from you than I thought." Kael's mind raced as fragments of memory came flooding back. The clash of steel, the roar of the Shadowspawn, and the moment Malachar seized the Dawnstone. His heart sank as the full weight of their loss settled over him. "Malachar, he has it, doesn't he?" Kael's voice was barely a whisper, heavy with dread. Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. He escaped with the Dawnstone, and now, without its light, the Shadowspawn grow stronger by the hour. They are unstoppable. Despair gripped Kael, threatening to pull him under. He had failed. The Dawnstone, The one hope his people had clung to for generations was gone, all because he hadn't been strong enough, fast enough. "This is my fault," he muttered, his voice breaking. "I've doomed us all." But Lyra's hand rested on his shoulder, firm and unyielding. "Listen to me, Kael. The Dawnstone isn't just a weapon or a relic. Its true power lies in what it represents: hope. And hope isn't something Malachar can steal or destroy. It's alive in the hearts of those who refuse to give up." Her words cut through the fog of his guilt, sharp and clear. She leaned closer, her gaze unwavering. "The clans are scattered, yes, but they're not broken. They need a leader who can remind them of what they are fighting for. Someone who can unite them, even without the Dawnstone. That someone is you." For a moment, Kael hesitated. The task ahead seemed impossible. How could he rally the clans when they had lost their greatest weapon? But then he thought of his people, of the families who had already suffered so much. He thought of Lyra, who had never wavered in her belief, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And he thought of the Dawnstone, not as a lost artifact, but as a symbol of what they could achieve together. Slowly, determination began to replace the despair in his heart. "You're right," he said, his voice steady now. "The Dawnstone may be gone, but its light still lives within us. I'll return to my homeland. I'll gather the clans, and we'll stand against the Shadowspawn, not because we have no choice, but because we refuse to let darkness win." Lyra smiled, a spark of pride shining in her eyes. "Then let's not waste another moment. The fight isn't over, Kael. It's only just begun." With renewed resolve, Kael rose to his feet, his body still weak, but his spirit unyielding. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time since the Dawnstone was lost, he felt a glimmer of hope, and that, he realized, was a power no enemy could ever take away. The journey back to the Dawnfire Clan was no simple return. For Kael and Lyra, every step carried the weight of uncertainty. As they moved from village to village, their mission became clear: to rally the scattered remnants of the clans and unite them against the looming threat of the Shadowspawn. Yet, unity didn't come easily. The scars of past conflicts ran deep, and trust was in short supply. Clan leaders eyed Kael with suspicion, questioning his right to lead. And Lyra, her presence alone stirred whispers of betrayal, her past as a former Shadowspawn servant, casting a long shadow over her intentions. Kael's resolve was tested almost immediately. In one village, a rival warrior named Tharn challenged his authority openly, demanding proof of his worth. The air grew tense as the clans gathered to witness the ceremonial duel, a test of strength, skill, and honor. Kael stepped forward, his sword gleaming in the fading light, and the clash began. It wasn't just a fight for victory, it was a battle for trust. Every strike, every parry, carried the weight of his people's future. And when Kael emerged victorious, his blade held high, the murmurs of doubt began to fade. Respect, hard-earned and well-deserved, started to take root. But while Kael's triumph won over some, Lyra's role remained a point of contention. Her knowledge of the Shadowspawn was invaluable. She understood their tactics, their weaknesses, and their relentless drive. She proposed a bold strategy, one that could turn the tide in their favor. Yet every word she spoke was met with sidelong glances and quiet skepticism. The allies they'd gathered were wary, unable to fully accept someone who had once walked among their enemies. Kael, however, stood firmly by her side. He saw not the shadow of her past, but the light of her courage and determination. His unwavering support deepened their bond, a silent promise that they would face whatever came together. But this loyalty came at a cost. The divide within the coalition grew sharper, threatening to fracture the fragile alliance they were trying to build. As the journey continued, the stakes grew higher. Each village brought new challenges, new doubts, and new opportunities to prove themselves. Kael and Lyra knew that unity was their only hope, but achieving it would require more than strength and strategy. It would demand trust not just in themselves, but in each other. And in a world where shadows lurked at every corner, trust was the rarest resource of all. The united clans pressed forward, their spirits high as they marched toward Dawnfire Stronghold, only to have their hopes dashed when they arrived. The fortress, once a beacon of strength, was now surrounded by the relentless Shadowspawn, their dark forces stretching as far as the eye could see. The air was thick with tension, the clash of steel and the cries of battle echoing across the battlefield. Kael, standing at the forefront, surveyed the scene with a steely resolve. He knew the odds were against them, but retreat was not an option. Their survival depended on breaking through the enemy lines. With a sharp command, Kael signaled the clans to adapt their strategy. They abandoned traditional formations, instead opting for guerrilla tactics that played to their strengths. Using the rugged terrain to their advantage, the warriors struck swiftly and vanished into the shadows, their movements unpredictable and lethal. Kael's leadership shone through as he made split-second decisions, directing his forces with precision. The battle was brutal, each moment a test of endurance and will. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the clans fought with a desperation born of necessity. Amid the chaos, Lyra emerged as a force to be reckoned with. Her forbidden magic, long suppressed, surged to the surface in bursts of raw power. She channeled it with finesse, her spells turning the tide in critical moments. A wave of fire here, a shield of light. There her actions saved countless lives and inspired those around her. Yet, even as her magic carved paths through the enemy, the Shadowspawn's numbers seemed endless. For every foe that fell, two more took its place. The weight of the struggle began to wear on the clans, and whispers of doubt crept into their ranks. Kael, ever the unyielding leader, faced the mounting pressure head-on. He made the hard choices, ordering retreats when necessary, sacrificing ground to save lives, and rallying his people with words of hope, even as the situation grew dire. His courage became a beacon for the clans, a reminder of what they were fighting for. But as the hours dragged on, and the Shadowspawn showed no sign of relenting, even Kael felt the first flickers of despair. The question lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy. Could they truly overcome such overwhelming odds? The battle raged on, each moment a testament to the resilience of the united clans. Yet as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield, the fight was far from over. The clans clung to their resolve, but the endless tide of the Shadowspawn threatened to drown even the brightest sparks of hope. The tension in the air was palpable as Kael stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "We need to strike at the heart of the Shadowspawn," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the gathered allies. If we can infiltrate their command center and take out Malachar, we might stand a chance to turn the tide, but it won't be easy. It's a suicide mission. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Then Lyra stepped forward, her expression resolute. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice firm. "I know their tactics, their patterns. If anyone can get us through, it's me." Her offer wasn't just one of skill. It was a silent promise to stand by him, no matter the cost. The journey into the Shadowspawn's territory was a nightmare brought to life. Every step felt like walking through a labyrinth of shadows, where danger lurked around every corner. The air itself seemed heavy, oppressive, as if the land itself was alive and hostile. Kael and Lyra moved with precision, their training and instincts keeping them one step ahead, but barely. At one point, a patrol came within inches of discovering them, their guttural voices echoing through the darkness. Kael's heart pounded as he pressed himself against the cold stone wall, Lyra's hand gripping his arm in silent warning. They held their breath, time stretching endlessly until the threat passed. But the true test came when Kael confronted the horrors his people had become under Malachar's influence. Twisted, corrupted figures roamed the halls, their once familiar faces now unrecognizable, their eyes hollow and filled with malice. Kael's stomach churned, his resolve wavering as he realized the depth of the Shadowspawn's corruption. These weren't just enemies, they were his kin, his friends, now lost to the darkness. Lyra noticed his hesitation and leaned closer, her voice a quiet anchor in the chaos. "This is what Malachar does," she whispered. "He takes what's good and twists it. But remember, Kael, this isn't your fault, and it doesn't have to be your end." Her words carried a weight Kael hadn't expected. Lyra's next revelation hit him like a thunderclap. Malachar wasn't always this way, she confessed, her voice tinged with sorrow. He was a hero once, a protector of his people, but vengeance consumed him, and now look at what he's become. Her gaze locked with Kael's, piercing and unyielding. "If you let your anger guide you, if you lose yourself to the same darkness, this could be your fate too." The truth of her warning settled over him, a chilling reminder of the thin line between hero and monster. As they pressed on, the stakes felt heavier than ever. Every step toward Malachar's inner sanctum was a step into the unknown, a test of Kael's strength, his morality, and his will to resist the pull of vengeance. Lyra's presence beside him was a constant reminder of what was at stake, not just the fate of their world, but the fate of his soul. The mission was no longer just about stopping Malachar. It was about Kael finding the strength to rise above the darkness, to choose a path that wouldn't lead him to the same ruin. And as they moved deeper into the heart of the Shadowspawn's stronghold, the question lingered in the air. Would Kael's resolve hold, or would he succumb to the same temptation that had claimed so many before him? As Kael and Lyra finally step into the cavernous depths of Malachar's lair, the air grows heavy with an oppressive, almost suffocating energy. The walls pulse faintly with a sickly, greenish glow, and the ground beneath their feet seems to vibrate with the raw power of the Dawnstone. Its light, once pure and radiant, now flickers erratically, twisted and corrupted by Malachar's dark magic. The Shadowspawn's presence is overwhelming, their numbers swelling as the Dawnstone amplifies their strength, turning the lair into a living nightmare. Malachar emerges from the shadows, his form towering and menacing, a dark reflection of everything Kael fears. His voice drips with venom as he begins to taunt Kael, conjuring vivid illusions of his past faces of those he couldn't save, moments where his courage faltered and the weight of his guilt made manifest. "Is this what you fought for, Kael?" Malachar sneers, his words cutting deeper than any blade. "Look at what your weakness has wrought." Kael's resolve wavers for a moment, his grip tightening on his weapon as the weight of his past threatens to consume him. But Lyra steps forward, her voice steady and unwavering. "Don't listen to him," she says, her eyes locking with Kael's. "This is who you are now, not the man in those visions." Her words reignite the fire within him, and with a roar, Kael charges at Malachar, their weapons clashing in a storm of sparks and fury. The duel is brutal and unrelenting. Malachar's strength is immense, his movements swift and calculated, each strike pushing Kael to his limits. Despite his determination, Kael finds himself struggling to keep up, his body battered and his energy dwindling. Just as it seems Malachar might overpower him, Lyra steps in, her hands glowing with a brilliant, golden light. She channels her magic into a single, devastating spell, striking at the core of Malachar's power. The blast weakens him, but the effort takes a devastating toll on Lyra. Her strength falters, and she sinks to her knees, her life force drained by the sheer magnitude of the spell. Kael's heart pounds with a mix of rage and grief as he sees Lyra collapse. Fueled by a surge of emotion, he launches himself at Malachar with renewed ferocity. Their final exchange is a blur of steel and magic, each strike echoing with the weight of their shared history. With a cry of defiance, Kael delivers the decisive blow, severing Malachar's connection to the Dawnstone and reclaiming its light. But the victory is hollow. As the dust settles, Kael rushes to Lyra's side, cradling her in his arms. Her breathing is shallow, her strength nearly gone. "You did it," she whispers, her voice barely audible. "The Dawnstone, it's safe." Tears stream down Kael's face as he clutches her hand, the cost of their triumph weighing heavily on his heart. The Dawnstone's light flickers faintly, a symbol of hope reclaimed, but the price paid for it is one Kael will carry forever. Kael knelt in the shadow of the ancient oak, his hands trembling as he cradled Lyra's lifeless form. The weight of her absence pressed down on him, heavier than any battle he had fought. Guilt clawed at his heart. Had he been faster, stronger, could he have saved her? The air around him seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that pulsed in rhythm with the Dawnstone at his side. Its light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the battlefield, as if it, too, mourned her loss. His gaze fell to the stone, its glow intensifying as if it sensed his turmoil. For a fleeting moment, hope sparked within him. The Dawnstone's power was vast, untamed. Could it bring her back? The thought was intoxicating, but it came with a chilling realization. To awaken the stone's full potential for such a task would risk unleashing forces he could not control. The very energy that might save Lyra could also tear the world apart. Kael's mind raced, torn between the love he held for her and the duty he owed to the world. The Shadowspawn still prowled the edges of the battlefield, their malevolent presence a threat to all life. The Dawnstone was the only weapon capable of ending their reign of terror. If he used it to revive Lyra, The Shadowspawn would remain, and countless others would suffer. But if he chose to banish them, Lyra would be lost to him forever. The choice was unbearable, a cruel test of his resolve. His heart screamed to save her, to defy fate itself. Yet as he looked down at her serene face, he remembered her words from days past, her unwavering belief in the greater good, her willingness to sacrifice for the sake of others. She had always been the selfless one, the light that guided him through the darkest times. Could he honor her by doing anything less? With a deep, shuddering breath, Kael made his decision. He rose to his feet, the Dawnstone glowing brighter in his grasp as he channeled its energy. The air around him crackled with power, and the ground beneath his feet trembled. He focused the stone's light, directing it outward in a radiant burst that swept across the battlefield. The Shadowspawn shrieked as the light consumed them, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The land itself seemed to sigh in relief, the oppressive darkness lifting as the Dawnstone's energy cleansed it. But as the light faded, so did the stone. With a final, blinding flash, it shattered into countless fragments, its power spent. The battlefield fell silent, save for the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. Kael stood amidst the wreckage, his heart heavy with both triumph and sorrow. The Shadowspawn were gone, their threat ended, but Lyra remained still, her lifeless form a stark reminder of the cost of victory. He knelt beside her once more, his hands brushing against her cold cheek. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered her name, but there was no answer. The Dawnstone's light had saved the world, but it could not bring her back. Kael's chest tightened, the weight of his sacrifice pressing down on him. Yet, even in his grief, he knew he had made the right choice. Lyra's spirit, her unwavering belief in the greater good, had guided him, and though she was gone, her legacy would endure, a beacon of hope in a world now free of darkness. As the dust settles and the clans begin to pick up the pieces of their shattered world, a strange quiet fills the air. The Shadowspawn are no more, their darkness banished, but the victory feels bittersweet. Kael, the hero who led the charge, stands at the center of it all, his name chanted in every corner of the land. Yet for him, the cheers ring hollow. The absence of Lyra, his guiding light, his heart, leaves a void no applause can fill. The weight of her sacrifice presses heavily on his shoulders, and he finds himself unable to celebrate the peace she helped create. Driven by a deep need for solace, Kael retreats to the Whispering Woods, the place where their journey began. The forest, once alive with the hum of magic and the whispers of ancient trees, feels different now. The air is heavier, the shadows longer, as if the woods themselves mourn Lyra's loss. Kael wanders aimlessly, his thoughts tangled in memories of her laughter, her bravery, and the way her presence could light up even the darkest of days. It's here, among the towering oaks and winding streams, that he feels closest to her. As he walks deeper into the heart of the forest, something catches his eye, a faint glimmer, soft and ethereal, like the first light of dawn breaking through a storm. At first, he thinks it's just a trick of the light, but as he draws closer, the glow grows stronger. It's a fragment of Lyra's soul, preserved by the Dawnstone's lingering magic. The sight takes his breath away. In that moment, he understands. Her sacrifice was not the end. Her spirit endures, a beacon of hope woven into the very fabric of the world she fought to save. Kael falls to his knees, overcome with emotion. The glimmer of light seems to pulse in response, as if it recognizes him, as if it carries a piece of her essence. He reaches out, his hand trembling, and the light brushes against his skin like a gentle caress. It's a silent reassurance, a reminder that she is still with him, watching over him, guiding him even in death. Tears stream down his face as he makes a vow, not just to Lyra, but to himself and to all who look to him for leadership. He will honor her memory by uniting the clans, forging a new era of peace and cooperation, one where the shadows of division and mistrust are banished forever. With renewed purpose, Kael rises to his feet. The weight of grief remains, but it is no longer paralyzing. Instead, it fuels his determination to build a world worthy of Lyra's sacrifice. As he steps out of the whispering woods and back into the light of the rising sun, he knows the road ahead will be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time since her passing, he feels hope, not just for himself, but for the future of all who call this land home. And in that hope, Lyra's light shines on. Kael's return to the Dawnfire Clan was met with a mixture of relief and anticipation. The people had long awaited a leader who could unite them, and in Kael, they saw not just a warrior, but a beacon of hope. As the ceremonial crown was placed upon his head, the weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, but so did a profound sense of purpose. This was not just a title, it was a promise to protect, to lead, and to heal. With Lyra's wisdom echoing in his mind, Kael wasted no time in forging alliances with the neighboring clans. These bonds were more than just political agreements. They were a testament to the power of unity. For generations, mistrust and old rivalries had kept the clans divided, but Kael saw beyond the scars of the past. He reached out with open hands and an open heart, reminding everyone that their shared future was far more important than their fractured history. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble, replaced by bridges of cooperation and mutual respect. One of Kael's first acts as leader was to establish a council unlike any the clans had ever known. Drawing from Lyra's teachings, he brought together scholars, warriors, and elders, creating a body where knowledge and strength could coexist. The council's purpose was clear: to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Decisions were no longer made in isolation, but through dialogue and understanding. It was a system built on balance, where every voice mattered and every perspective was valued. Under Kael's leadership, the clans began to thrive. Crops flourished, trade routes expanded, and the people found a renewed sense of hope. Yet, even in this time of prosperity, Kael remained watchful. He had seen how quickly darkness could rise, how easily peace could be shattered. His vigilance became a quiet, guiding force, a reminder that the light they now enjoyed was something to be protected, not taken for granted. Kael often found himself drawn to the Whispering Woods, the place where Lyra's presence seemed strongest. Among the ancient trees, he felt her guidance like a gentle breeze, whispering truths he had yet to fully understand. It was here that he reflected on his journey, on the sacrifices made, and on the path still ahead. The woods became his sanctuary, a place where he could reconnect with the lessons of the past and prepare for the challenges of the future. As the clans grew stronger, so did their bond with one another. Kael's vision of unity was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality. and though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing for certain: as long as they stood together, no darkness could ever extinguish the light they had fought so hard to reclaim. Years had passed since Kael first stood against the Shadowspawn, and the scars of that ancient conflict still lingered in the hearts of his people. But as the world began to heal, a new darkness stirred. A rogue faction, emboldened by whispers of forbidden power, sought to resurrect the very force that had nearly destroyed them all. These rebels believed they could harness the remnants of the Shadowspawn's essence, turning its corruption into a weapon for their own ambitions. And so, the fragile peace Kael had fought so hard to protect was once again under siege. Now a seasoned leader, Kael faced this new threat with a heavy heart. The fear of repeating past mistakes weighed on him, a shadow that no amount of sunlight could dispel. He had seen firsthand the cost of division, the price of arrogance, and the toll of despair. Yet this time, he was not the same man who had once led with raw determination and unchecked fury. The lessons Lyra had taught him, lessons of compassion, unity, and hope, had taken root, shaping him into a leader who understood that true strength lay not in domination, but in connection. As the rogue faction's forces gathered on the horizon, Kael rallied his people, not with fiery speeches of vengeance, but with quiet resolve. He spoke of the bonds they had forged, the sacrifices made by those who came before, and the future they were fighting to protect. His words carried the weight of experience, and his presence inspired both courage and trust. This battle would not be won by brute force alone. It would be won by the ideals they carried in their hearts. The final confrontation was as much a clash of wills as it was a clash of blades. Kael stood face to face with the rogue faction's leader, a once trusted ally who had succumbed to the lure of power. Their exchange was not just a debate of strategies, but a battle of philosophies. Kael's opponent spoke of strength through control, of bending the world to their will. But Kael countered with a vision of strength through unity, of lifting others rather than crushing them. In that moment, the true stakes of the conflict became clear. This was a test of whether the lessons of the past had truly been learned. As the battle raged around them, Kael's resolve never wavered. He fought not to destroy but to protect, not to dominate but to inspire. And when the dust settled, it was not just a victory for his people, but a triumph of the ideals Lyra had instilled in him. The rogue faction was defeated, but more importantly, the spirit of unity and hope endured. Kael had proven that even in the face of darkness, the light of compassion could guide the way. This moment was not just the end of a conflict, but the beginning of a new chapter, a testament to the enduring power of lessons learned and the unyielding strength of a leader who led not just with authority, but with heart. As the final echoes of battle fade into silence, the world breathes a collective sigh of relief. The rogue faction, once a looming shadow over the land, lies defeated, their ambitions scattered like ash in the wind. Peace settles over the realm, fragile yet radiant, like morning dew on a field of wildflowers. And there, atop the Watchtower where his journey first began, Kael stands alone, his silhouette etched against the breaking dawn. The horizon stretches before him, painted in hues of gold and amber, as the first rays of sunlight pierce through the darkness. It's a moment of quiet triumph, but also one of profound reflection. Kael's mind drifts to the winding path that brought him here, the trials, the losses, the moments of doubt that threaten to consume him. He thinks of Lyra, her laughter, her courage, and the void her absence leaves behind. Yet, even in her passing, her spirit endures, woven into the very fabric of the world Kael has fought to protect. Her legacy isn't just in the peace he's secured, but in the hope he carries forward. The wind whispers through the Watchtower, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers and the distant hum of a world awakening. Kael closes his eyes, letting the warmth of the rising sun wash over him. He knows this isn't the end. The road ahead remains uncertain, filled with challenges yet unseen. But for the first time in a long time, he feels ready not just to face them, but to rise above them. The light of dawn, soft and unyielding, seems to whisper a promise. No matter how dark the night, a new day will always come. With a steady breath, Kael turns his gaze forward, toward the horizon where the sky meets the earth. The journey continues, and though the scars of the past will always remain, they serve as a reminder of the strength forged in their making. As the sun climbs higher, casting its light across the land, Kael steps forward, a quiet resolve in his heart. The dawn is here, and with it, the promise of a new beginning.